Federal investigators may have just uncovered a crucial piece of digital evidence that completely shatters Brian Hooker's alibi. For months, the mysterious disappearance of Lynette Hooker has focused entirely on one single narrative.
Brian claims that during a pitch-black night in the Bahamas, he was left drifting in a small dinghy for hours after his wife suddenly vanished, left completely helpless and alone.
But detectives now suspect the couple's yacht
was secretly keeping a record of everything that occurred that night. Not from an eyewitness, not from a confession or security cameras, but through the boat's own batteries.
Reports show federal agents successfully extracted data from the vessel's newly upgraded lithium battery setup.
The evidence they uncovered has quickly become the most stunning twist in this ongoing mystery.
During the exact hours Brian claimed to be drifting helplessly out at sea, the boat recorded heavy electrical activity.
Sudden power surges, system reboots,
running onboard equipment.
Energy draws that investigators believe are impossible if the ship was truly abandoned.
Let that sink in for a second.
If Brian was miles away in the dark, fighting for his life, who was actually on board operating the boat? Who was drawing that power? And why does this digital footprint tell an entirely different story about that night?
These critical questions are driving a fast-moving investigation, fueled by newly gathered witness accounts,
local weather data, digital connection logs, and compelling evidence that could soon rewrite the entire mystery of Lynette Hooker.
Before going further, please remember we are discussing an active, real-life missing person case,
involving serious allegations, disputed evidence, and dark circumstances.
Some details may be difficult to hear, so viewer discretion is strongly advised.
To see why investigators focused so heavily on these battery logs,
we first have to go back to the start
and look closely at the couple driving this dark mystery.
Long before federal agents started analyzing system logs and digital footprints,
Lynette and Brian Hooker seem to have built the absolute perfect life most people only dream of.
For years, they shared their global voyages online, posting endless pictures from their cozy sailboat,
a 46-foot boat named Soulmate.
Friends, relatives, and online followers watch them cruise through beautiful tropical seas,
explore hidden islands, and live what looked like a flawless life at sea.
From the outside, the couple had traded their normal routines for non-stop adventure.
At the heart of every single post was Lynette Hooker.
Friends remember her as energetic, independent, and incredibly loyal to those around her.
She loved working out, being in nature, and seemed completely dedicated to the life she and Brian built.
Her profile pictures regularly captured her enjoying the open ocean, working out on deck, visiting new places, and sharing their journey. To those who knew her well, Lynette was not the type to just vanish.
Brian Hooker brought a completely different set of talents to the yacht.
A retired Marine and skilled sailor, he handled all the technical aspects of the ship.
Records show he spent long hours upgrading complex onboard systems,
overseeing their tech,
and installing complex gear throughout the yacht.
Friends knew him as a man obsessed with gadgets, navigation systems, and the digital setup keeping their vessel running on long voyages. Together, the couple spent years sailing, sharing their life online under the brand The Sailing Hookers.
Their yacht became a vivid symbol of freedom, retirement, and pure adventure.
From island sunsets to daily life.
Anchored in hidden coves, they painted the picture of a couple living a dream most only talk about.
But beneath the happy photos and travel updates, investigators would soon begin dissecting details of their marriage much more closely. Because by the spring of 2026, that dream cruise was heading straight toward a disappearance that would spark an international investigation, placing a luxury sailboat at the center of a growing mystery and leaving one haunting question hanging over it all. What truly went down aboard Soulmate the night Lynette Hooker disappeared?
Then came the fateful voyage that turned their sailing dream into a national obsession.
On the night of April 4th,
2026, Lynette and Brian Hooker anchored their custom sailboat, Soulmate, near Elbow Cay in the Bahamas.
Earlier that day, everything seemed completely normal.
the couple spent the afternoon ashore in Hopetown, a quiet island community famous for its marinas,
waterfront bistros, and rich sailing culture.
Several witnesses later recalled seeing the pair together that evening. A local bartender who served them noted they seemed incredibly relaxed,
grabbing dinner, having some drinks, and soaking in the island vibe before heading back to their yacht.
Based on the timeline Brian Hooker later gave police, the pair left the docks around 7:30 p.m., boarding their dinghy to head back to Soulmate, anchored in the bay.
Whatever happened next would soon become the dark heart of this entire mystery.
Brian told investigators that during the short boat ride, the weather suddenly turned violent.
He claimed heavy swells and fierce currents triggered total chaos out in the pitch black. By his account, Lynette was thrown from the dinghy while still clutching the ignition key.
When she went overboard, the motor died, leaving him with no way to restart the vessel. Brian insisted he tried to rescue her, but according to his story, the fierce currents instantly swept Lynette away into the night.
Within minutes, he lost sight of her.
Stranded in the dead dinghy, Brian claimed he fought the water for hours before finally paddling back to shore. He later reported the crisis to local police, sparking a massive rescue search across the entire area. As news broke, emergency crews rushed out to the Sea of Abaco.
The Royal Bahamas Police immediately launched an active search.
Bahamian marine units scanned the open sea. Rescue helicopters swept the area from above.
The United States Coast Guard soon joined, pouring every available resource into locating any trace of Lynette. Rescue teams systematically combed massive sections of ocean, praying she had somehow survived, drifting to some isolated spot they had not yet checked. But as the hours ticked away, not a single trace was found. No confirmed sightings, no distress signals, and absolutely zero evidence explaining where she went. In those anxious early days, public reactions were filled with sympathy. At first, it sounded like a devastating maritime tragedy. A couple heading back to their sailboat, a sudden pitch-black accident, and a desperate fight to survive. To the public, Brian Hooker was just a grieving man who had survived a living nightmare. And for Lyle, investigators seemed to accept the theory that Lynette's disappearance was exactly what it looked like, a tragic accident at sea. But almost immediately, troubling questions began to surface. Doubts about the weather, gaps in the timeline, and mysteries surrounding the hours between Lynette vanishing and Brian finally showing up on shore. Then they found something even more disturbing. As detectives began measuring Brian's story against what witnesses actually saw, digital tracking, and physical evidence, they found pieces of the puzzle that simply did not fit. Initially, the public assumed it was just a heartbreaking tragedy. But police quickly spotted holes in his story, even as rescue teams searched the waters near Elbow Cay. Detectives did exactly what they always do during a major investigation. They pressure tested his timeline, because while Brian's explanation sounded believable at first, authorities had to make sure the physical evidence truly backed up his version of that night, and right away, they hit major roadblocks. The first big red flag involved the weather. Going by Brian's statement, rough seas and harsh conditions played a major role in the tragedy. He spoke of blinding darkness, howling winds, and brutal waves as he and Lynette fought to get their small dinghy back to the Soulmate. Yet when investigators dug into local weather data from that night, they uncovered a strange discrepancy. Meteorological reports from the Sea of Abaco told a very different tale. Instead of the wild, chaotic storm everyone imagined after hearing Brian's harrowing story, official reports pointed to surprisingly calm waters. across the region during critical hours of that fateful night.
Ocean conditions can shift rapidly and differ from place to place. But investigators desperately wanted to know if the weather was actually as lethal as Brian claimed.
That did not prove guilt, but it definitely sparked a much deeper investigation.
Next, detectives hit another massive hurdle: the rain.
Weather radar data, later reviewed by police,
Showed a heavy storm front moving right through that specific sector.
During the exact hours Brian claimed to be lost at sea in his dinghy.
To an outsider, that seems minor, but detectives saw a glaring red flag.
Had Brian really been stranded on the open water for hours? Floating straight through that intense localized rainstorm.
There should have been clear proof he was caught in the downpour.
Instead, his physical state when rescuers finally found him raised serious doubts.
Police closely analyzed whether he actually looked like a man who had battled freezing rain and harsh ocean elements for hours that night. Still, this did not prove what happened to Lynette, but it added another massive contradiction to the pile. Next came the witness statements, not from detectives or forensic experts, but from everyday folks living right near the anchorage.
As detectives rebuilt the timeline,
They interviewed locals who had been close to where Soulmate was anchored that night.
multiple witnesses reported hearing a heavy, strange splash later on that evening. This was not some small object dropping into the bay.
Or a normal boating sound, but a massive splash, loud enough to shatter the peace of the quiet harbor.
What made these reports so critical was the timing.
Based on statements from the investigation,
That loud splash happened hours after Brian claimed he and Lynette had sailed away in their dinghy.
detectives immediately realized how critical this was. Because if that sound occurred when locals claimed, it pointed to a dark possibility. Someone or something went over the side, right near the yacht, long after Brian claimed they had already left the anchorage.
Sure, eyewitnesses can make mistakes.
Memories fade, and sounds are easily misidentified. The police knew all of that, but they also recognized something else. When separate pieces of evidence start pointing in the exact same direction, you pay attention. Now, they had weather reports raising questions, a rain timeline that clashed with the official story, and eyewitness accounts that simply did not fit with Brian's version of events.
On their own, none of these clues proved a crime.
But together, they formed a chilling pattern, one that the investigation could no longer ignore. The closer they looked at the timeline, the less they believed they were dealing with a tragic accident. And as they dug deeper, they kept coming back to one central, glaring question.
Was the timeline wrong? Because if it was, then every single claim built on it would fall apart under scrutiny.
And that is exactly where the police started looking. If witness statements raised questions, the digital forensics would raise even more. By now, detectives were looking far beyond eyewitness statements and meteorology reports. They were focusing on the boat itself. And unlike fragile human memory, technology silently preserves the digital footprints people leave behind. The vessel at the center of this mystery, Soulmate, was no ordinary sailboat. Like most modern luxury yachts, it was packed with high-tech electronics designed to keep the couple comfortable and connected at sea. GPS navigation tracked the vessel's location. Onboard security cameras watched over the deck. Satellite internet kept the couple online, even when anchored in the middle of nowhere.
All these onboard systems quietly recorded data during their daily operation.
To the couple, these systems were just convenient.
To federal agents, they were silent witnesses.
As the search for Lynette grew more intense, federal agents began treating Soulmate less like a boat and more like a digital crime scene.
Once investigators stepped on board the vessel,
They weren't just looking for physical evidence. They wanted logs, databases, and connections. And timestamps, anything that could reconstruct the timeline in the dark hours after Lynette vanished. Every single device suddenly became a potential source of evidence. Every electronic system now loomed as a possible piece of the timeline.
And reports indicate that one specific network quickly drew serious scrutiny. The yacht's private internet network.
Like most high-end long-range vessels, Soulmate was allegedly using Starlink satellite technology, which kept onboard devices connected to the web even miles away from normal cellular towers. At first glance, that detail might seem trivial. But detectives knew a crucial truth. Modern satellite systems do far more than just browse the web. They leave digital footprints. Whenever a smartphone connects, or any device links up to the network, every active connection leaves behind a highly traceable digital footprint. Detectives reportedly began analyzing the router traffic and connection logs from the yacht's onboard network. Their objective was clear: uncover exactly which devices logged on and when. If Brian Hooker's alibi held any water, there had to be a block of time when he was far from the yacht. Based on his official story, he floated helplessly for hours in a broken dinghy after Lynette went missing. That version of events should place him miles away from Soulmate. But detectives reportedly wanted to see if the yacht's digital logs told the same story. As more details slowly came to light, investigators reportedly detected active device connections on the yacht during crucial hours of that night. This massive finding triggered urgent new questions. Because hard digital data does not care about alibis. They do not care about excuses. They simply record real activity. Detectives started matching those digital logs against the exact timeline Brian provided, dissecting it minute by minute. And very quickly, serious red flags began to appear. The main issue was not just one piece of conflicting data. It was the alarming realization that several different streams of evidence pointed to the exact same conclusion. Weather reports raised doubts. Witness sightings raised doubts. Now, the yacht's electronic logs were pointing to trouble, too.
Detectives had to ask if the digital trail left on board the Soulmate matched.
An abandoned yacht, while its captain drifted far away on the open ocean. Or did those logs point to an entirely different, more chilling scenario? Because if someone was using systems on that boat, when Brian claimed he was far away, the police needed to know why. Who was triggering that beta? Who was actively operating those onboard systems? And how would that reshape the timeline that built this entire case? The truth remained hidden for now, but one thing was starting to look certain. The deeper detectives probed into the yacht's electronic systems, the more twisted his story became. Then they uncovered a piece of evidence that blew this entire mystery wide open. Deep inside the vessel lay a hidden cache of data that they believe Brian never expected anyone to track down. And then they unearthed something Brian never even thought about. By this late stage of the case, they had already spent months dissecting witness testimonies, weather logs, search reports, and digital evidence. Each category raised troubling questions, but none matched the sheer shock of what investigators allegedly uncovered within the vessel's electrical system. Because unlike human witnesses, a battery cannot forget. Unlike a person, it never gets confused. And unlike a suspect, it cannot rewrite its story. To understand why detectives focused so heavily on the battery logs aboard Soulmate, we first have to rewind several months before Lynette disappeared. Long before this investigation even started, the yacht reportedly took a massive lightning strike. For sailors, lightning is a terrifying hazard. A direct hit can wreck navigation systems, fry electronics, kill communication gear, and ruin critical power grids all across the vessel. Reports show the blast caused so much damage that major repairs were required. Entire sections of the boat's wiring were replaced. Gear was upgraded. Modern tech was installed, and those upgrades included a state-of-the-art lithium battery setup. At that time, nobody could have imagined those very batteries would one day serve as key evidence in a major missing person case.
To most folks, a battery is just a battery. It holds power, and that is all. But modern marine lithium units are different.
Many compact with high-tech monitoring systems designed to log energy usage across the entire boat.
Every single power draw,
Every device that boots up, every heavy electrical strain placed on the network, it all leaves a digital footprint.
This detailed data helps crew members watch battery health,
Hunt down system issues, and track energy use while living at sea. But for detectives, these logs serve a different purpose. They help reconstruct a timeline of events.
This is why federal agents reportedly started calling the system a sort of digital black box. It did not record voices and it did not capture any video,
But it quietly tracked exactly what the boat was doing, hour after hour, minute after minute, even when nobody thought anyone was looking. Once federal investigators boarded the boat and started dissecting its systems, focus quickly locked onto those battery logs.
Investigators reportedly needed an answer to one burning question. What exactly happened on Soulmate during those hours Lynette vanished?
According to Blaine Hooker's story, the answer was simple: absolutely nothing.
His narrative placed him completely away from the yacht. In his statement, he claimed he was stuck in a stalled dinghy after Lynette fell overboard. If true, the yacht should have been floating completely empty,
Dark, silent, and sitting quietly at anchor. But reports indicate those battery logs told a very different story. Investigators reportedly spotted several electrical events happening right when the boat was supposed to be completely dead. Initially, these spikes might have seemed totally harmless.
A small power draw, a tiny surge, or an onboard system booting up.
On their own, none of these details point to foul play.
Boats consume power constantly. Fridges cycle on and off all day. Automated systems kick in. Devices pull power. That is normal. What worried investigators was the pattern, and even more importantly, the timing, since this power usage reportedly happened during that exact window. Brian insisted he was nowhere near the yacht.
according to official case files reviewed by detectives.
They spotted major electrical surges logged in the battery system. These were not minor flickers or background interference, but distinct power drains suggesting someone was actively running onboard systems. One specific spike drew immediate focus: the yacht's freshwater system.
Like most long-distance sailboats,
Soulmate relied on electric pumps to move fresh water through the cabin. Turn on a tap, and the pump fires up. Open a valve or take a hot shower, and that pump draws electricity instantly. Every single drop requires power. And police reports suggest they found power spikes matching that very machinery running during the critical timeline. Think about the implications here. If those technical readings are right, someone was likely using the plumbing when Brian swore the vessel was completely empty. That detail alone is massive, but detectives uncovered even more. Other electrical patterns suggested several more onboard systems were being operated too. We are talking cabin lights, general power grids, and basic appliances. Of course, none of this is strange if people are on board. But according to the official timeline Brian gave to police, nobody should have been on that boat. That glaring contradiction was impossible to ignore, especially when comparing those battery logs against his story, because they kept facing the exact same question. Who was drawing that current? Who turned those systems on? Who triggered those surges? And why did the digital footprint clash so heavily with the story told to police? Those questions quickly turned the battery logs
From a minor technical detail into the absolute centerpiece of this entire case.
Detectives began mapping this digital data against every other piece of evidence, like local weather, witness accounts, Wi-Fi connection logs, GPS movement history, formal statements, and search histories. They were not just trying to prove the power drain happened. They wanted to see if those energy surges fit into a much darker picture. And case reports suggest investigators were convinced it did.
Because these power readings did not exist in a vacuum.
They lined up perfectly with other evidence that was already raising red flags.
Hard questions about timing.
Questions about location and what really happened aboard Soulmate in the hours after Lynette vanished. As authorities dug deeper, the weight of those battery logs only seemed to grow.
Not because power data can crack a case alone, it cannot.
Digital forensics always requires context.
Police have to prove what triggered each event.
If other explanations make sense, if the logs are accurate, and if they can verify the data.
Yet even with those hurdles,
Those battery logs allegedly delivered exactly what investigators were hunting for, an objective timeline.
Unlike fleeting human memory, these records were generated automatically.
Unlike interviews, they weren't swayed by emotion.
Unlike keyboard detectives and public speculation, they simply documented raw activity. And raw activity can be measured, tested, and verified. That explains why detectives reportedly poured so many hours into those logs. Because if those battery records were indeed accurate, they raised a troubling possibility that Brian Hooker's story was flawed, incomplete, or flat out wrong. And if his timeline collapsed, the foundation of the entire case crumbled. Suddenly, detectives weren't just investigating a disappearance.
They were weighing two competing realities. One lived inside witness statements. The other sat in digital records.
And the divide between those worlds was growing wider by the day.
Months prior, that battery system was installed to shield the yacht from lightning strikes. Now, police reportedly believe that very system captured evidence no human ever planned to leave behind.
Silent evidence trapped inside the vessel, while rescue crews desperately combed the ocean.
Data that kept recording long after Lynette vanished.
Clues that might finally tell detectives what actually happened aboard Soulmate.
Because by this point, authorities were looking way past isolated clues. They were locking in on the timeline itself. And those battery records may have handed them the ultimate wildcard, a second, purely digital timeline.
Detectives now realize they weren't just sorting through clashing stories.
They had unearthed an unshakable digital timeline. By the time the investigation reached this critical phase, officers were no longer focusing on single shreds of evidence.
They were searching for patterns.
Because in massive missing persons cases, a lone clue rarely hands you the answers.
Instead, they reconstruct timelines and cross-reference statements, decipher behavior, and hunt for recurring patterns that explain the unexplainable. And one central theme kept surfacing in Lynette's case: technology. The very probe that sparked questions about internet history, battery logs, and electronic tracking
Now pushed detectives to look closer at a different corner of Brian Hooker's past.
According to public records, investigators flagged troubling allegations linked to Brian's former job,
specifically involving GPS tracking and surveillance tech. These allegations had nothing to do with Lynette's disappearance. Nor do old claims prove guilt in an active, separate case.
Detectives know that better than anyone, but they also realize something else.
Past patterns can often shed light on future actions,
especially when trying to see if specific actions fit into a larger, darker pattern.
And here, authorities took note because the claims touched on a critical question,
already driving this entire case.
Location. Where exactly was Brian Hooker during those crucial hours the night Lynette vanished?
That single question sat at the center of everything.
Witness statements raised doubts about the timeline. Weather records did the exact same thing.
Digital network logs also chipped away at that timeline.
Even battery diagnostic reports kept pointing to discrepancies. Now, detectives were reportedly digging into old allegations about GPS tracking and location histories.
Again,
none of this proved guilt.
But it explained why police focused so heavily on unlocking every scrap of digital evidence.
When detectives suspect a timeline is flawed,
Independent electronic logs become pure gold. People forget small details. Witnesses make honest mistakes.
Memories fade over time. Digital footprints do not.
That basic truth would shape the entire course of this investigation. Police also started mapping out Brian's actions right after Lynette vanished. In any suspicious missing persons case,
Detectives dissect the actions of the people closest to the victim.
strange actions do not automatically mean guilt, but they do provide crucial context. In the immediate days following the incident,
Brian was seen as a heartbroken husband who barely survived a terrifying ordeal.
public sympathy was incredibly strong.
Most people saw a grieving man whose wife vanished into the dark, while he miraculously survived.
But as new details leaked, public suspicion began to mount. Reports show that once the initial search wound down,
Brian left the Bahamas and flew back to America while the case was wide open.
That sudden departure sparked heavy debate among case followers.
from worried family members to true crime observers tracking the news.
Some questioned the move, others defended it. But investigators stayed focused on hard facts, ignoring the public noise.
Police know that trauma and grief affect every person differently.
Some families cling to the police, while others completely pull away.
Some talk to reporters, others dodge the spotlight. Behavior does not solve cases. Physical proof does.
That is why detectives prioritize digital logs and verifiable facts over random online speculation. As investigators dug deeper into the physical evidence, they kept running straight into the exact same wall, the timeline. Almost every major lead kept pointing back to those critical hours. Detectives reportedly began cross-referencing timestamps from dozens of different sources.
Eyewitness statements, cellular logs, weather patterns, web searches, and battery data.
The goal was simple: to see if these separate pieces of data backed up his story, or if they revealed a completely different version of events.
This tedious process is exactly how strong circumstantial cases are built.
Despite what people believe, most criminal cases are not cracked by one single piece of dramatic evidence. Instead, detectives gather dozens of tiny facts that seem completely meaningless on their own. But when those details align, a much clearer picture begins to emerge. Think of it like a jigsaw puzzle. A single piece tells you nothing. 10 pieces show a pattern. 50 pieces start revealing the whole scene. Detectives reportedly believed they were finally seeing that picture form in the Hooker mystery. It wasn't because of a single witness or one digital record, not even a sole allegation. Instead, multiple independent sources were raising the exact same questions. Questions about where Brian actually was. Questions about what went down aboard Soulmate, and whether the events of that night truly unfolded the way they first claimed. By this point, detectives had spent months reviewing digital evidence, interviewing witnesses, and testing timelines. As they kept piecing together that timeline, they realized there was one critical category of evidence they still needed to analyze. Because while digital logs revealed one side of the story, investigators still needed to know if the boat itself held physical clues, evidence that could either back up or shatter the theories they were building. So, the team turned their full attention to physical evidence inside the yacht. While investigators kept analyzing the digital records from Soulmate, they were also running a much more traditional style of police work. They were cataloging everything, every single compartment, every locker, every piece of equipment, and every single item that belonged on that yacht. Because when detectives try to trace the final known movements of a missing person, even the most ordinary objects become critical. And aboard Soulmate, a few specific items quickly caught their eye. The first category was Lynette's fitness equipment. Her friends, family, and social media accounts painted a clear picture of someone dedicated to her health. Even while living on a sailboat,
Lynette stayed incredibly active.
Online photos showed her working out on deck,
Staying fit while traveling, making wellness a major part of her daily routine. That might seem minor, but investigators always focus on daily routines.
People naturally follow predictable habits.
The everyday items people use can reveal a surprising amount about how they lived and what happened to them.
During their search, investigators looked closely at workout gear that used to be visible on the boat. They paid close attention to the free weights and dumbbells Lynette regularly used. Soon, questions arose about whether all those weights were still there.
Detectives combed through old photos and videos,
Cross-referencing social media posts to figure out exactly what was aboard Soulmate before Lynette went missing.
This process was standard.
In major cases, police routinely compare old photos with current inventory,
They are looking for anything out of place, anything that was moved,
or anything that vanished completely.
and most of all, anything that helps explain the timeline.
To be clear, missing workout gear doesn't instantly mean foul play.
Far from it. Items get lost, thrown overboard, moved around, or simply misidentified all the time.
The police understood those possibilities well.
But because this case already had questions about the timeline
And physical evidence.
any missing item was bound to raise a red flag.
And that wasn't the only equipment they looked at. They also focused on the yacht's diving gear.
For boaters traveling around the Bahamas, carrying scuba gear is totally normal.
The islands are famous for their reefs,
Diverse marine life and pristine waters. Most cruising sailors keep oxygen tanks, regulators, and other dive gear on board as a daily necessity.
and Lynette and Brian were just the same.
According to case reports,
The couple kept dive gear on their vessel Soulmate, and investigators later scrutinized that equipment to help reconstruct what happened the night Lynette disappeared.
What actually caught the attention of investigators was the condition of specific tanks.
Investigators apparently uncovered highly suspicious discrepancies
Regarding how some of this dive gear was used right before her disappearance.
Specifically, detectives wanted to know if certain air tanks showed recent use and if those patterns matched the timeline the husband provided.
Yet again, the main issue was not what they discovered.
It was the troubling questions those findings raised. If that dive gear had been used lately, who used it and exactly when? And does that activity line up with the established sequence of events?
Those questions quickly became critical because detectives
We're already looking at several other pieces of evidence that contradicted Brian's version of events.
The battery logs, the cell records.
The witness statements, and local weather patterns. Each piece of information was scrutinized individually.
But authorities also needed to figure out if these different clues connected, if they pointed to a single conclusion.
Or if they were just random coincidences.
That difference is absolutely crucial because the most common error people make when tracking missing person cases is assuming every strange detail has the same significance. Detectives do not work that way.
A theory is not hard evidence. A possibility is not proof. And a question is never a conclusion. During this complex investigation, agents have run through several different scenarios to figure out what really happened on board Soulmate.
Some of those theories involve simple accidents. Others point to much darker outcomes. For now, most of the details released remain just allegations and theories,
Or leads to explore, rather than established facts.
This is why police focus so much on corroborative evidence.
A single clue rarely solves a mystery. A witness can easily be mistaken. And digital records always need context.
Something might be missing from the sailboat for reasons totally unrelated to any crime.
But when multiple independent pieces of evidence begin pointing the same way, investigators pay close attention.
And that is exactly what seems to be happening in the Lynette Hooker case.
Federal agents ended up facing a massive stack of unresolved questions. Doubts about the timeline, about the weather, and about witness statements. questions about digital cell phone usage and battery logs,
and doubts about gear on the boat.
By itself, each question could have been explained.
But together, they created a mystery that authorities simply could not ignore.
Because, even after months of searching,
Despite endless hours of analysis and intense public spotlight, one cold fact remained unchanged.
Lynette Hooker was still gone. Without knowing what actually happened to her, every lead only seems to deepen the mystery. Despite all these new developments, the ultimate question remains unanswered.
Most major investigations hit a wall where the facts stop matching up.
A moment when a simple, straightforward explanation turns into something incredibly messy. For detectives tracking the strange disappearance of Lynette Hooker, that critical moment arrived when they began comparing the official story against the actual evidence they uncovered. At the very beginning, the whole scenario seemed tragically simple. A husband and wife heading back to their sailboat in the Bahamas. Then, disaster. A woman fell overboard, and despite massive search efforts, vanished without a trace. It felt like the kind of tragic boating accident that happens every single year. At least, that is what everyone first believed. But then, the timeline began to fracture. Detectives started checking weather data and found discrepancies they could not ignore.
They double-checked witness statements and found clues that contradicted the husband's story.
They dug into digital forensics and spotted activity that clashed with the reported timeline. Then came the battery logs. The crucial breakthrough that blew this missing person case wide open into something bigger. Because according to reports, those digital files supposedly tracked power usage on the yacht Soulmate during the hours Brian Hooker claimed he was stranded elsewhere. Not a vague witness statement, not a rumor, but raw digital footprints. Data that investigators believe tells a story untouched by human bias or memory. And that is what makes this case unique. Most cases rely on human memory, what people saw, and what they claim happened. But tech does not lie. It does not make excuses. It just logs facts. Detectives spent hours comparing those digital logs against Brian's story, over and over. And every single check raised new questions. Why did eyewitness statements clash directly with his timeline? Why did the local weather reports spark so much suspicion? Why did online activity logs show traffic that demanded a closer look? Why did those battery logs show activity aboard a boat that should be empty? And perhaps most crucially, if Brian was telling the truth, how do we explain all these technological contradictions? These unanswered questions sit at the very heart of the mystery. Authorities have spent months analyzing the yacht's electronics, interviewing witnesses, and rebuilding events surrounding Lynette's disappearance. This investigation has captured headlines way beyond the Bahamas, sparking endless debate among true crime sleuths and experienced maritime investigators alike. Still, despite all the noise, the core fact remains unchanged. Lynette Hooker is still missing. Without any clear answers, the theories will only keep growing. To some, the clues point to a tragic accident. Others suspect investigators are uncovering signs of a deliberate act. But regardless of public speculation, investigators face a far higher standard. Questions aren't enough. Simple suspicion won't cut it. Even inconsistencies aren't enough. Authorities must establish cold facts. They must determine what is provable, separating theory from hard evidence. That process is slow, sometimes agonizingly slow, especially with digital forensics in maritime environments, and events that unfolded far from any security cameras. As of this recording, no court has ruled on exactly what happened to Lynette Hooker that night. Detectives are still analyzing the clues surrounding her mysterious disappearance. And that brings us right back to where this story began. Those batteries. Out of all the clues, weather data, witness statements, and internet history, equipment logs, and reconstructed timelines, It may ultimately be those battery records that hold the key. Because unlike humans, batteries don't forget. They don't get confused.
They never change their stories, they just record the facts. Every drop of power, every system boot,
Every electrical pulse captured silently before anyone realized how much it mattered.
if detectives are right, this data preserved a history that human memory simply could not. A truth that existed long before the case started, long before anyone knew it would matter.
And maybe,
Long before anyone knew what went down aboard the Soulmate.
Today, detectives are still searching for answers.
a family is forced to live with painful uncertainty, and this Bahamian mystery remains completely unsolved.
Which leaves one final question.
What really happened to Lynette Hooker?